Pleasure to introduce Godelieve Spaas. She's a professor of art, culture, and transition at HZ University of Applied Sciences, where she leads an artistic research lab focused on sustainable system transitions in Delta regions. Previously, she served as a professor of economy as commons. Sorry, there's too many sounds in there, at Avans University, researching alternative economic models based on collectivity and regeneration rather than competition and growth. As a researcher, maker, performer, and curator, she works at the intersection of art and science to develop new narratives and skills for equitable and inclusive transitions towards the future. And today she's going to be talking to us about the middle as radical choice. So I will hand over to you, Godelieve. You have.
Thank you, Wendy and Vlad, both. The name that is tagged under my photo is the name of my colleague, Arthur. Later on, I will put my name and email in the chat so you can remember who I am if you want to. Yesterday, I listened in briefly to Claire Adams' lecture, and although she has a different perspective, there are some similarities in how we understand the middle, but I'll come to that. I'll go and stand because I prefer doing that when I talk. The middle as a radical choice, or how I came to de-romance the middle. What I do is I explore how art and artistic research can contribute to cultural change within system transitions. Because without questioning and revising the underlying principles of our established order, we simply won't be able to realize the kind of systemic change that today's big challenges demand from us. I used to believe, and yes, that's a belief, not a certainty, that we could only truly shift the established order from the outside. It takes outsiders, strangers, and radical ideas. We cannot climb out of our quicksand using our own hands. Changing the system requires bold moves and alternative underlying stories and a shift in worldview coming with a set of new values and organizing principles. And I felt backed up in that belief by all kinds of transition theories that suggest we need impulses from the other and elsewhere to create real change. But I no longer believe that. And I can tell you that shift in my thinking wasn't easy. It was like a cultural transition inside of me, where I once saw the middle as a dull, average, uniform, and stuck place. I now see it as a place that we need to reclaim, a space of friction, tension, and contradiction. The middle isn't where thinking ends. It's where thinking starts to matter. I'll take you with me through my journey and just lean back. It's a bit of a story. It's a bit of observations of me and the world around me. So just look at it as if you're looking at a theater play or something. Let me go back to where this began. For the past few years, I've been making podcasts called The In-Between Space. Each series explores different aspects of our economy. For example, money and profit, markets, nature and growth. Looking for new perspectives and critical reflections, I ask innovative entrepreneurs and artists to reflect on the topic. And in 2024, I started a new series about the transition of our food system. We all know, we are all aware that something has to change. Whether you worry about your health, the soil quality, biodiversity, clean water or air, all requires a fundamental shift. This time, I decided not to focus on what needs to change, but on how we get there. So I interviewed farmers with strong opinions on that, both conventional and organic farmers, commercially driven or ideologically driven. And we had good, deep conversations, sometimes even tough debates. As the conversations went on, something started to nag at me. I felt myself more and more uncomfortable. I felt that resistance against something I couldn't quite name. I talked about it with my fellow podcast maker, but he didn't have that feeling at all. It kept rubbing, and I kept searching. And over time, it became clear to me what was bothering me. These farmers, each one bold, radical in their thinking, standing up against the system, they saw themselves as the middle, not as rebels, not as outsiders, but as people who represent the middle ground. And they truly believe that real change can only come from there. We just had elections in the Netherlands, and throughout the campaign, everyone kept talking about the middle. And in everyday language, middle is usually the space between two extremes. And that is also the meaning of a new action group in the Netherlands called For Our Country, Here's to the Middle. This group was launched by a couple of marketeers and a former politician. And their message? The political system may be stuck, but we don't have to be. They believe it's time for a mild majority. People who aren't shouting at the extremes, but just want real practical solutions. They're calling on people to step up, to get involved, to help rebuild trust, connection, pride in the country. Their goal is to make sure that the voice of the reasonable majority is heard again in politics. The middle is a space for reasonable people that do not shout, that avoid conflict. You get it, that's not the middle that I feel attracted to. Even worse, according to Sander Schimmelpenninck, a Dutch columnist, the middle belongs to lazy people. It's the place where we just let everything slide, where nothing seems to matter anymore, where we don't even push back, not against social media, not against the AI that floods us with lies and fakes. We're sitting there, watching talk shows that laugh off deep fakes with fascist undertones. Somewhere along the way, the middle has turned into lazy, this side, that side talk. While we completely ignore the fact that we're in the middle of an information war, that we are in the middle of more than a few mega crises. That so-called reasonable middle, the people who no longer speak up, is also the middle we call the middle class, the part of society that stays silent because life is good. The middle where we still hold on to that deep-rooted belief, especially since the fall of the Berlin Wall, that capitalism will lift up everyone, that the market will fix itself and ultimately serve society. It's the system that many believe created the broad middle class. People living comfortably, having little to complain about, and believing things will just keep getting better. Why question a system if it works for you? And yet these farmers, also part of that same middle class, questioning and living the good life, question that very same system. So there is Hans. He's a dairy farmer. He has about 100 cows. He all knows by heart. He steps up. And he voices that how he sees the system should change. And he's threatened for it, literally, by colleague farmers. He's furious with the government, even though he's regularly invited to advise them on food system transitions, he doesn't feel seen. His farm is considered a business, he says, expected to scale up, compete, grow, fit the market. But he wants to be seen as a farmer, a caretaker of animals, soil, ecosystems. I want them to see my soul, he shouts, my values, my dreams. But neither the state nor the banks do. Then there's Irish, another farmer. She takes a gentler tone. She explains that temporary subsidies for things like biodiversity or more sustainable practices often end up costing more in the long run. Take her wildflower field borders, for example. When the subsidies ended, she couldn't afford to maintain them anymore. But stopping wasn't simple. She had to start spraying again for years, just to get rid of the weeds she once planted and nurtured. It gets worse. Advisors on feed, fertilizer, and pesticides are profit-driven. They're there to sell, not to support, always pushing for more. To resist that pressure, Iris joined a cooperative, a collective effort to manage resources differently. But even there, she says, it's incredibly hard not to fall into that same trap. Chris Pang, an organic farmer, feels powerless in the supply chain. Retail calls the shots. Supermarkets decide what gets the shelf space, not based on what's healthy for people, animals, or the planet, but on what makes the most money. As a farmer, you're left with no choice. You grow what they demand, and they demand what sells fast and cheap. It's a system where profit comes first, and the people actually growing the food have the least say. These farmers are angry, they're tired, but they refuse to leave the middle, despite everything. They believe the only way to change the food system starts in the middle. They go against all dominant transition theories, those that claim transformation comes from the margins, from radical experiments. For them, those experiments are inspiring, yes, but not real. They're not enough. They believe that staying in the system, in the friction, in the middle, is the work. That we can, no, must, climb out of quicksand by our own hands. The more I explore the farmer's ideas of the middle, the more I realize that my understanding of the middle only makes sense in times of stability. When things are steady, the middle feels like a balancing point, like in the days of the rising of the middle class, when unions, employers, governments negotiated together to keep that balance alive. Not as something fixed, but as a living, moving act of collaboration. But when the world starts to wobble, things shift. Somehow we begin to romanticize that middle as a reasonable, calm, harmonious, traditional space, a safe space we long for. But that kind of middle is an illusion. It's a story sold to us by parties on the flanks, promising things can go back to the way they were. And that's exactly what these farmers resist. They refuse to be pulled into the extremes. They're not clinging to nostalgia. They are reclaiming the middle. Not as a quiet neutral zone, but as a place of tension, of voice, of encounter. To see what we call the political center today has in reality shifted sharply to the right. That idea of reasonableness is being used to mask what is unfair, unjust, and increasingly extreme. When the flank is dressed up as the middle, it becomes a place of compromise, of status quo, of disguised power. And that is what these farmers push back against. When we talk about the middle, we often picture a soft spot between the extremes, a place of compromise, of quiet, of moderation, the political center, the middle class. safe, balanced, reasonable. But that is not the middle we need, because when it comes to real change, that idea of the middle won't hold. And the edges, change, seem to be all about certainty, big answers, loud rejection, all or nothing energy. But in the middle, change is about relationships. It's about staying inside the system with all its mess, all its contradictions, and doing the work from within. So let's reclaim the middle, not as a neutral zone, but as a place where differences meet responsibility, where we don't agree, but we don't walk away either, where we keep showing up and keep shaping the future together. It's about being in it with all its contradictions, constraints, and complexity. Change isn't clean nor linear. It's messy, slow, often uncomfortable. It's shaped by real people, real lives, and real limits. This is where policy meets practice, where radical ideas meet the daily reality, where science, art, and lived experience sit at the same table, not to agree, but to figure out how to stay in the work together. The middle doesn't erase the tension, it carries it. And that's what makes real change possible. It's not just a concept, it's a practice, not just an idea, it's an ethical space. It asks us to stay close to complexity, to act without pretending to know, and to stay with the trouble together. Because of my discomfort, or better, my resistance, I stopped working on the podcast for a while after the interviews with the farmers. I needed to figure out where I stood before I could move forward. And once I began to embrace this idea of the middle, I decided to focus the next part of the series, the interviews with the artists, on how the middle can work as a real practice of change, to really test it, to see if it actually holds. I ended up speaking with two artists who both see the middle as a space where we can radically rethink two of the most essential parts of our lives: our relation to territory and the unjust distribution of money. The first artist is Henk Wildschut. He's a photographer, or better said, a photographic researcher. And his process reminds me of participatory research, slow, attentive, deeply embedded. His images don't just illustrate, they reveal. They capture what he saw and what he couldn't explain in words. From 23 to 25, he returned to the region where he grew up, in the east of the Netherlands, a landscape where nature and farming coexist, but also clash. I met him when he's staying there, and he's living in a tiny tent on a small camping ground in the midst of nature and agriculture. We make a coffee outside of his tent. It's kind of cold but sunny. And then he starts telling me how he works with the farmers and the other users of that region. It's in that landscape where nature and farming coexist but also clash. Cattle farms produce nitrogen emissions that damage nearby nature reserves. Wolves attack sheep. Conservationists sue farmers. Farmers distrust the government. Everyone feels under attack. Henk started his work with an ideological notion that he might be able to find that middle ground. He wanted to reconnect the sides, to open a dialogue, to show that maybe both could be right in their own way. But the more he listened, the deeper the differences became. Not just in interests, but in entire worldviews. Not just in what was happening, but in what it meant. Over 2 years, he immersed himself in these conflicting realities. He learned to understand everyone's motivations and translated them into images stripped to their essence. His photo series doesn't offer a solution, no bridge, no resolution. Instead, it shows a landscape shaped by belief, pain, and love for the same land, seen from unbridgeable perspectives. And that's exactly where the middle lives, not in harmony, but in the courage to stay, even when nothing fits. Hank saw it up close. The differences between the ecologists, farmers, and recreational land users, they weren't just big. They were in practice unbridgeable. They didn't want to speak to each other. They didn't do it. They had given up on finding a shared solution. They chose the flanks, dug in deep, and stopped trying to understand the other side. And still, Hank understood them all. He could see the reason in each position and the limits. In search of the core, he placed their stories side by side. Just look at it, there's some sound. Not to flatten the tension, but to let the extremes stand in full view next to each other. And that's where something surprising happened. A pattern emerged. The shared language started to take shape. And when the people he worked with saw the movie together for the first time, something happened. Their gaze towards one another softened, but maybe even more important, their views of themselves shifted. One of them said, "Now that I see this, I think I might have been a little bit too harsh in my thoughts." Denise Harleman is an artist who explored what solidarity really means. To do that, he started an organization called Collective Capital. Because money speaks louder than morals, she decided to let money lead her research. And she started it with an open invitation. It was simple and bold. "Hi, this is Denise. I'm looking for 100 people to donate €50 a month for 8 months. Together we will raise €40,000. That money will go to 5 people. They each receive €1,000 a month for 8 months. We don't know yet who those 5 people are, or how we will choose them, or why. But that's exactly what we're going to figure out. Are you in?" The whole idea was to learn by doing, not just about solidarity, but about practicing it, to see what happens when 100 people think, act, and decide together. What do they believe solidarity really means? And what are they willing to do for it? People who take part quickly noticed something uncomfortable. Their wish to share runs straight into deep ideas about what is fair, what has value, and who owns that. They're suddenly pushed to take a position on moral questions that they would normally leave to politicians and the government. You can feel it almost right away. People start sorting quietly. Some lives are seen as promising, worthy investment. Others are treated with doubt, as if the money might be wasted, as if nothing would really change, or worse, as if it might make things spiral. How to break out of that giver-receiver dynamic? On the flyer that invited people who wanted to have the money, it was laid out simply. You could sign up to receive €1,000 a month. No strings attached, no checks, no proof, no questions about how you would spend it. Just applying was enough to say, you probably need it. Everything about offer said, we trust you. But one question was never asked. Do the people reading this flyer have any reason to trust us? From the side of the givers, the one with the money, it felt obvious. Why wouldn't someone not take part? And then Ezra, one of the receivers, sighed and said, oh, and none of you thought you might have something to learn from us too? And that's when it became clear. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, about roles, about who gets to give and who is expected to receive. And it ran deeper than expected. Solidarity kept being measured against productivity, against resilience, against someone's potential to grow or succeed. Even when someone said, clearly, everyone deserves a rest and a breathing space, there was often this pause. Do they really? So the real question is not who deserves solidarity, it's how we take shared responsibility for a world where everyone's basic needs are secured. Again and again, the same two values kept rising to the surface: trust and dignity. Collective capital is a learning process. It's about how to take care of each other's basic needs. It's not just about giving money, it's about how we give, what we ask, what we don't ask, what we say, what we hold back. It's about radical honesty with each other and with ourselves. The real work happens in the space after the money, in the relationships, in the discomfort, in figuring out what it means to build security together. Some participants look back on the session after the first meeting. Everyone is so kind here. After the third meeting, why am I even here? I don't get what we're doing. After the fourth meeting, this assignment is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and mold myself out of clay. After the fifth, you all talk like aliens. I don't understand you. And I leave here feeling shit. After the eighth, I want other people to feel what I felt here: love. The collective capital learning groups, in the collective capital learning groups, equality isn't some moral starting point. It's a messy, ongoing practice. It's not a given, but it's something you have to keep working at, and no one gets to sit it out. One participant said something that hits the political heart of what's happening here. To live together with love, everyone has to show up as fully equal. Even me, in my confusion, my awkwardness, or my privilege. That is the quiet revolution of the middle. Not some big symbolic gesture, but a daily shake-up of how we speak, how we act, and how we are together. The project of Denise is super successful. And she's invited to come and do it in very different cities. And what is happening is that they're squeezing her into a format. And she keeps resisting that, being fired over and over. But she keeps, because she really wants that over and over again. It's not kind of becoming a casualty or something that is just a few steps you have to follow. She really wants you to dive into the hard question. Who gets to define what the problem is? Who is seen as hardworking? And who gets labeled lazy? Whose lives are automatically protected? Whose are controlled, ignored, or made invisible? And Denise says it like this: we're all part of that system, and we can't question it without also asking where we stand in it, what our position makes possible, and where we benefit from from the way things are. Again, people's experiences showed us we had defined the problem too narrow, too neatly, too safely, and that if we held on to the way we were doing things, we would just end up repeating exactly what we were trying to change. So this became the real work, staying accountable for what our choices mean for others, staying open to what we still need to learn, staying responsible for the impact we have, because that's the only way to create real change, from a place of deep connections to people's lives and realities. The middle is an ideological space. Believing in it is a political choice in itself. The partners I spoke described it clearly. The middle is under threat, squeezed by systems that are too big, too powerful, too dominant, and too uniform. An economy built on endless capital growth can only survive by exhausting people and the planet. A political system built to serve the economy, as if economic growth alone leads to well-being, ends up concentrating power, excluding people, and eventually sliding towards fascism. In that system, the true middle disappears. The messy, uncomfortable place where people share their difference and try to make them work. The strength of the middle doesn't lie in everybody being the same. It lies in holding the many. A place where complexity doesn't need to be fixed, where it's allowed to exist. Instead, we have sold the illusion of a calm, reasonable, neutral middle. A romantic version of the middle has been hijacked, shifted to the right, repacked as common sense. And so we are lured into extremism, not because we want it, not because we want it, but because we did not hold on the difficult middle.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I've got about 20 million pages of notes here. Thank you. That was fantastic. I'm not gonna steal chair privilege. If anybody does have any questions, first, then if you want to either raise your hand. Mark, I can see you put a lot of stuff in the chat as that was going on. Did you want to comment on any of that? Move this out the way. You're muted, I think.
Yeah.
First of all, to say a truly magnificent presentation. Really enheartening, enlivening, and wise. And the whole question about how we bring together minds that would normally disagree so that they can come together and work intelligently to bring out the best in all of those seems increasingly to many, I think, as the only way or the fastest possible way to bring about coherent thought and action. A delight, a delight. Thank you.
I'm not going to respond to that. Thank you. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Godelieve?
Or maybe someone disagrees. Also super interesting.
I can't find where to put up my hand. But I do have a few thoughts and questions, if that's okay. First of all, thanks very much. I'm very interested in that middle as a space for countering extremism. But I think from what you were saying there, we seem to have this shift between populism being presented as the middle.
Yeah.
And at times we're talking about sort of Chantal Mouffe sort of agonistic spaces, particularly for the arts. I wonder if you have some thoughts about if we wish to valorize the middle, how we avoid that being dominated by populist voices as has happened.
that's exactly the difficulty with the middle we have now, actually. And it has to do that, well, as I see it, that over the past decades, we came to see the middle or the middle class as a comfortable space. So that brought us this kind of idea or nostalgic notion of a middle that's harmonious. And a middle is only harmonious if you agree. And what you see is that in populist statements, people tend to agree on the statement, maybe not so much on everything that lies behind it, but it's that invitation to simple solutions. It's not difficult what's going on, and we love to believe that. I love to believe that too. Although I say I don't. Of course, it would be great if that was true. If it was so simple, just there is no climate change, stop worrying. Of course, everybody every day experiences something is going on. And I think it's weighing on us. And that's why these farmers were so interesting for me, because they really fought for that middle. That is not a nice place to be. That is a hard place to be. It's not soft. It's the place where everything comes together. And so I think the dilemma you're referring to is exactly the dilemma that I've tried to sketch or to come to grips with also in my personal life, because I was raised in the 70s, and that were the years that we resisted to that middle class as kind of bourgeoisie and we didn't want to relate to that. And over the years, over the decades, I came to the understanding that it's exactly the middle where I should be now. So I'm an extremist to want or to long for that middle.
Thank you. Wow, we've got now 3 people jumping in. They want to go. So we'll go in that order: Mark, Joanne, and Fiona. So Mark, if you want to just respond to that in some way.
If I can just use the metaphor of if you're in a plane and your plane is holding over Schiphol Airport or over Heathrow Airport or over Charles de Gaulle, and if I use that as a metaphor for not landing, as in not knowing the answer, not categorizing what another person's saying, or when you are lost in doubt and you can't find the answer. The technology that we need, it seems to me, is twofold. First of all, you've mentioned this togethering, this coming together of people who are disarmed and disarmingly delightful in the way that their minds are working as one. And we then need to tie that in also with the technology for that large group to then hold in not knowing when we don't know the solution, for example, to a big UN SDG. So it's the technology for those two things, the togethering, and in that togethering, then being able to hold in not knowing, holding over Schiphol. And I think the faster we can begin to share the art and science of how we do that with large numbers of people, the faster we'll be able to progress in tackling so many critical problems. So I'm going to be raiding your brain, if I may, for all your ideas for togethering and how we together do the not knowing.
That's a big question. There's a sentence in what you're saying that kind of stuck to me, so I'm going to respond to that, because you are looking for large groups. And I do agree that it would be a good thing if many people started to step into their middle, in that togetherness and in that not knowing. I'm not sure if it should be large groups. because it's not an easy thing in a large group. Somehow, well, there's the whole issue of how can we be safe? There's the whole issue of being in a group and speaking up for what you really think. If I shared or I participated in some of the learning journeys of collective capital, and it was so super complicated to say or what the things that I thought out loud. I saw one of the receivers in the supermarket the day before that meeting, and she had that the bag, and in that bag was wine, chips, and all kind of sweet things. And I had a judgment about that. I really thought she shouldn't spend her money that way, still thinking it was my money. And I decided to say that out loud, even if I thought it was awkward and wrong of me to think that. And that really helped in shifting the conversation, because then she could say something about what was awkward about me. So me being totally truthful about my prejudice, about my judgments, kind of was a first opening in shifting the relationship, but because it allowed the other one to become angry with me. And I think that kind of conversations, if we're talking about togetherness and if we're talking about not knowing, is that type of conversations and understanding what are the underlying issues in that conversation, namely the fact that there is a disbalance in power, that there is a disbalance in who we think deserves a good life and who doesn't. It's all that kind of, and if we don't bring that to the surface, we will never come to that togetherness, and we will never step into that not knowing. Because I don't know how to be equal with somebody who's totally different than me. That is a process. That's a process of stepping into a relationship and becoming related. And that takes time, and that takes attention, and that takes insecurity, and that takes looking into, the dark side of your thoughts. And there are many.
That reminds me so much of what Christine was talking about. I don't know, Christine, if it resonated with you. I saw you were here somewhere in terms of how you started your talk yesterday. I'm just... Yeah. So we just have Joanne, if you can be very quick, just to make sure we have enough time to move on to the next thing. And Fiona, I might ask you to put your question in the chat, and then maybe we can come back to it. That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Right. A very quick question then. The word centrist or center might reflect a little bit better some of the things that you're talking about. Center has a better feel. You're at the very heart of the situation. I would even say heart instead of middle or even center in that respect. But just a quick note, what is the middle in the U.S. is skewed to the right because of our informational problem. So we have the billionaires running our media systems and all that. So what we hear and what we know about skews to the right. But the distinguished people listening all know that. We have problems in the U.S. Thanks so much. Excellent talk.
Thank you, Joanne.
That was a really fantastic talk. And I wish, again, we're stuck always with time at our back and at our front. But thank you so much for that. And thank you, everybody, for all the interesting conversations and discussions. Massive